My name is Amanda Parker, and if you met me today, you'd probably think I have it all together. I'm married to Mark, the kind of partner I used to daydream about. A man who listens, who stands by me, who treats our little girl, Lily, like she hung the moon and the stars. Lily is the center of our world, this bright, curious, endlessly joyful child who makes every struggle feel worth it. But if you'd seen me at 18, you'd have seen someone completely different. A girl who thought she was standing on the edge of a bright future, only to watch everything she'd counted on slip away in a matter of minutes. High school graduation is supposed to be this triumphant, carefree day. For me, it was the day I lost the last piece of security I had left. The ceremony had barely ended, and I was still wearing my cap and gown, floating on that odd mix of excitement and nerves about what came next. That's when Sandra, my stepmother, pulled me aside with that tight, pinched smile I'd learned to dread. The kind of smile that meant bad news was coming, wrapped in sticky, sweet words. "Amanda," she said, her voice syrupy, "I need you to know the college fund your dad left behind won't be yours after all." No explanation. No kindness. She just dropped it on me, like she was telling me it might rain tomorrow. I remember staring at her, trying to process what she'd just said, feeling my stomach drop out from under me. "What do you mean?" I finally managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. My dad, my anchor, my safety net, had set up that fund for me, told me himself it was for my education. It was like a promise, a way of saying he'd always look out for me even if he wasn't there. Sandra didn't even try to soften the blow. She just shrugged like it was no big deal. "Well, Ian and I talked, and we think it's better if the money goes to something more practical. Ian has a plan for it. Honestly, Amanda, you've always been more of a dreamer. College might not be the best fit for you." There it was. The dismissal, the way she always made me feel like my ambitions were naive, like wanting more for myself was some kind of childish fantasy. I could barely speak. Ian had always been Sandra's golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in her eyes. But this, taking the money my dad left specifically for me, felt like a betrayal I hadn't thought them capable of. My voice shook as I tried to stand up for myself. That money was for me. Dad wanted that. Of course, Ian was right there lurking in the background. He stepped in, all confidence and condescension. "Amanda, calm down. I'll make good use of it. I'm planning to invest it, start a business. Dad would want us to be smart. Besides, you can just take out loans if college means that much to you." Like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, like I was being selfish for objecting. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. My heart hammered in my chest, my face burning with anger and humiliation. "You can't just take what's mine." "That's stealing!" I snapped, louder than I meant to. I saw Sandra's face flush with embarrassment. How dare I make a scene in front of people? She hissed, "Lower your voice, Amanda. This is family business, and you're being dramatic." I wanted to scream, to tell everyone what they were doing, but I just turned and walked away, trying to hold myself together. The rest of that day passed in a haze. The celebration felt hollow, the congratulations from friends and teachers bouncing off me like I was wrapped in glass. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. My dad had died the year before, and I'd clung to that college fund like a lifeline, a last piece of him. Without him, I realized, Sandra and Ian could do whatever they wanted. I'd never felt so alone. I tried to talk to Sandra the next morning, hoping maybe she'd see how unfair it was. Maybe she'd change her mind when she saw how much it meant to me. She just rolled her eyes, already annoyed. "Amanda, you're an adult now. Time to grow up and figure things out. That money's for the family, and that means Ian, too." She made it sound like I was being selfish for wanting what my dad had left for me. The only person I could really talk to was Mark, my boyfriend at the time. I told him everything, the anger, the helplessness, and he was furious for me. "They can't do that to you. That fund was for your future." He wanted to go to battle for me, but the account was in Sandra's name. Legally, I didn't have a leg to stand on. Without my dad, there was no one to advocate for me. Mark wanted to fight, but I told him to drop it. I didn't want to drag it out, to make my home life even more unbearable. So I pretended to let it go, but deep down, I made myself a promise. I'd find a way to make it on my own, no matter how hard it got. I'd prove to them, and to myself, that I could do it without their help. The years that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I worked every part-time job I could find: waitressing, retail, babysitting, cleaning houses, sometimes juggling 2 or 3 at once. The money barely covered gas, tuition at the local community college, and a room in a shared apartment. The idea of a 4-year university seemed like some distant dream, but I refused to give up on it. Every time I got discouraged, I'd remember the way Sandra had looked at me, so sure I'd fail, and it fueled me to keep going. Meanwhile, Ian was living out the fantasy I was supposed to have. He took that college fund and blew through it, starting a business that amounted to little more than a series of expensive hobbies. Sandra bragged about him constantly. "Your brother is so ambitious. You should learn from him." As if I wasn't working twice as hard for a fraction of the reward. Sometimes I'd come home exhausted from a double shift, only to hear them laughing in the kitchen about Ian's latest venture. It hurt, but it also made me more determined. Mark never wavered. He saw how hard I was pushing myself, how close I came to giving up, and he never let me quit. When I broke down, he held me. When I doubted myself, he reminded me what I was capable of. He was my safe place when everything else felt hostile and uncertain. The day I finally got my acceptance letter to transfer to a university was bittersweet. I was proud, so proud, but also exhausted, physically and emotionally. Mark and I got engaged around that time, and if I thought Sandra might finally show a little warmth, I was wrong. She greeted the news with a skeptical frown. "Are you sure you're ready for marriage, Amanda? It's a big responsibility, and you're still figuring things out." Her words dripped with judgment, as if she was waiting for me to prove her right and fall apart. Ian, ever the supportive brother, piled on. "Yeah, maybe focus on your career, if you can even call it that." I wanted to snap back, to list every sacrifice I'd made, every obstacle I'd overcome, but I just smiled and said, "Don't worry about me. I'm doing just fine." I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Those university years tested every limit I had. I worked evenings at a coffee shop, weekends at a bookstore, sometimes squeezing in a third job if rent was due, or my car broke down. My schedule was a patchwork of classes, work shifts, and stolen hours of sleep. I lost weight, skipped meals, and ran on caffeine and adrenaline. Most days I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water, just surviving from one day to the next. There were nights I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering if it was all worth it, if I was just proving Sandra right. But every time I reached the edge of giving up, I'd remember the promise I made to myself, that I wouldn't let them define me, that I'd build a life I was proud of, no matter how hard it got. Looking back, I see now how much those years shaped me. The struggle was brutal, but it forced me to dig deep, to find strength I didn't know I had. It taught me the value of perseverance, the importance of believing in myself when no one else would. And when I finally walked across that stage to get my diploma, this time with Mark and Lily cheering me on, I knew I'd earned every moment of happiness that followed. Sometimes, when things got really tough, my dad's voice would echo in my mind, grounding me, reminding me of the reasons I'd set out on this path in the first place. He always believed that setbacks were just setups for comebacks, and I clung to that conviction like a lifeline. It was true. I'd lost that fund, the safety net I'd counted on, and that betrayal stung more than I ever expected. But no one, not even those who took from me, could rob me of my stubborn determination. The money problems felt relentless, gnawing at the edges of every day, but the isolation was what truly weighed me down. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being abandoned by the people you expect should care the most. Sandra and Ian, my own flesh and blood, barely acknowledged I existed. They never called, never texted, not even a cursory check-in to see if I was eating or surviving. It was as if I'd simply ceased to exist in their world. All the while, Sandra carried on with her life as though nothing had changed. She'd host her elegant little get-togethers, the house always filled with laughter and the clink of wine glasses, boasting about Ian's latest ventures and business schemes. I heard about those parties secondhand, how she'd beam with pride describing Ian's big future, how she'd entertain her guests with stories that made their life sound charmed and effortless. Meanwhile, I was holed up in my cramped apartment, subsisting on instant noodles and whatever I could scrape together. There were weeks when I had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying groceries, a reality so far removed from Sandra's dinner table that it felt like we lived on different planets. I'll never forget one afternoon at the grocery store. I was counting out coins for a basket of canned soup and the cheapest bread I could find, hoping I had enough to cover it. That's when I ran into Ian, who was loading his cart with the sort of luxury cuts I'd only ever seen on cooking shows. Filet mignon, ribeye, the works. He spotted me, looked me up and down, and gave me that trademark smirk, dripping with condescension. Still doing that whole struggling student thing, huh? You know, life could be a lot easier if you just played your cards right. The implication stung. I wanted to retort, to throw all my frustration and anger at him right there in the aisle, but I bit my tongue. I knew if I opened my mouth, I might not be able to stop. Instead, I just stared at my battered sneakers and walked away. Things didn't magically improve overnight, but by my second year, the tiniest cracks of light began to appear. I managed to land a paid internship at a local marketing firm, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. The pay was modest, but it was enough that I could finally drop one of my 3 exhausting part-time jobs. For the first time, the experience felt tangible, as if there was a path forward that wasn't just scraping by. I was getting a glimpse of a future I could build for myself, not just one I had to endure. My schedule was grueling. Sunrise classes, afternoons at the internship, nights spent either buried in textbooks or slinging coffee at the shop. Socializing became a luxury I couldn't afford. There were days when I'd stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes hollow with exhaustion, and wonder if I was actually moving forward or just treading water. Some moments were almost comically unfair, as if life wanted to see how much I could take before breaking. A week before finals, my laptop, a cheap second-hand model I'd babied for years, finally died. I had no savings for a replacement, so I borrowed an ancient wheezing computer from a friend. It took 10 minutes just to open a document, and every keystroke felt like a test of patience. One night, sitting in the campus library long past midnight, desperately trying to finish a final paper, I felt all my frustration and exhaustion boil over. I just sat there and cried, overwhelmed by how insurmountable everything felt. In that moment, I nearly let go. But then, through the haze of tears, I pictured Sandra and Ian, imagined them smirking, delighted at my struggles. That thought sparked something defiant in me. I refused to give them that satisfaction. I wiped my tears, took a shaky breath, and kept typing. It wasn't just their absence that hurt. Sandra and Ian seemed to relish any opportunity to belittle me, especially in front of others. There's one Thanksgiving that seared into my memory like a bad scar. I'd just started college, still raw and uncertain, and I hadn't planned on going home for the holiday. Mark, ever the peacemaker, convinced me to make an appearance, hoping it might smooth things over. I should have trusted my instincts. Sandra's house was packed with people. Her friends, Ian's business associates, all dressed to impress. The air was thick with forced cheer. We were halfway through dinner when Ian, after a few drinks, decided to put me on the spot. "So Amanda," he said, voice carrying across the table, "how's that glamorous student life treating you?" "Still making lattes and scraping by?" A few guests laughed uncertainly, not sure if it was a joke. My face burned with humiliation. Before I could muster a response, Sandra cut in with a syrupy, patronizing tone. "Ian, don't be mean. Amanda is doing the best she can. Not everyone is cut out for success right away." The pause before "doing the best she can" was laced with judgment. I felt like I was shrinking right there at the table, surrounded by people who barely knew me, yet already thought less of me. Through all of this, Mark was my lifeline, my anchor when I felt like I might drift away. No matter how rough things became, he never let me forget my purpose. He knew when to push me and when to just be present. Many nights I'd stagger home after a brutal shift or a marathon study session, so tired I could barely speak. Mark would have something simple waiting, a grilled cheese, leftover soup, even just a cup of tea. He never made a big deal about it, just quietly showed up for me in all the ways that mattered. One night, after I'd failed a crucial exam, I walked in the door and just collapsed, sobbing. Mark didn't press me for details. He just held me, letting me cry until the storm passed. When I could finally speak, I poured out all my fears. That I wasn't good enough. That maybe Sandra and Ian were right about me. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Amanda, this one test doesn't define you. You're doing something most people would have quit by now. You can stumble, but you won't fall. I believe in you, even when you can't." Afterward, he made me hot chocolate, the two of us sitting in silence until I felt steady again. It wasn't just comfort. It was the deep, unwavering faith he had in me, the kind of support I'd always craved from my family and never received. Graduation day still doesn't feel real when I think back on it. Crossing that stage felt bigger than any diploma. It represented every late night, every tear, every moment I doubted myself and kept going anyway. I didn't invite Sandra or Ian. They'd forfeited their place in my victories long ago. Instead, Mark and a handful of true friends cheered for me, their pride and joy echoing across the auditorium. I remember standing there in my cap and gown, looking at the sea of faces, and feeling a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. This was my victory, and no one could diminish it. After graduation, things finally began to shift in tangible ways. I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm. Not the flashiest position, but one that paid the bills and gave me a sense of security I'd never really known. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear of the next bill or emergency. Mark and I celebrated in our own quiet way, marveling at how far we'd come together. We got married the following year, a small but joyful ceremony surrounded by people who truly cared. When we found out I was pregnant with Lily, it felt like the universe was finally giving me a break. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life on my own terms, a life defined by resilience, hard work, and the kind of love that endures through everything. The future finally felt like something I could look forward to, rather than just survive. Sandra and Ian just disappeared from my life one day, as if I'd been erased from the story entirely. I used to replay our last conversations, searching for some clue, some moment when things shifted. But it was always the same. One day I mattered, and the next I was invisible. Maybe that's why work made so much sense to me. Climbing the career ladder wasn't easy, but at least there were rules. No one cared how you felt. They just watched what you did. I'd already learned how to survive tough days back in college, scraping by on caffeine and stubbornness, so starting at the very bottom of the company didn't faze me. I took on the accounts nobody else wanted, the ones that were too messy, too small, or too difficult. I stayed late, volunteered for extra projects, and showed up even when I felt like quitting. The exhaustion was familiar, almost comforting, and before long, people started to notice. One afternoon, after I'd pulled off a tricky presentation that had everyone on edge, my manager stopped me outside the conference room. "Amanda, the way you handled that client, it's like you've been doing this for years. You have a real talent for connecting with people." I smiled and thanked her, but inside those words echoed around, filling a space I didn't know was empty. It meant everything to be seen and acknowledged, even by someone who'd only known me for a year. But it also stung in a way I couldn't quite explain. The more praise I got from colleagues and managers, the more I realized how little I'd ever received from my own family. It was as if the approval I'd been chasing as a kid was suddenly everywhere, except from the people who were supposed to give it. I'd sit in meetings while my boss bragged about my work ethic, or overhear coworkers say, "Amanda's a star. She's going places." Every time, there was a flicker of pride, but also a hollow ache. I'd catch myself wondering why Ian couldn't say something like that. Why couldn't Sandra see my worth just once? All I'd ever gotten from them were snide remarks or cold indifference, sometimes disguised as advice. It hurt, realizing that the validation I'd waited for all those years would never come from them. I started to understand that some gaps can't ever be filled by other people's praise. Still, life kept moving. Every day felt like laying another brick in a foundation I was building for myself. After a few years of hard work, I was promoted to account manager, leading a team of my own. It was surreal. Just a short time before, I'd been worried about paying rent, and now I was sitting at the table with executives, pitching ideas I'd crafted late at night in my tiny apartment. There were moments when I'd look around the boardroom and feel a quiet thrill, not just for the title or the salary, but for the proof that I could do it. Through it all, Mark was my anchor. When I got the promotion, he surprised me with a small dinner party at home, just us and a handful of close friends. He raised his glass and said, "You've earned this. No one deserves it more, Amanda." The look in his eyes made me feel seen in a way that went deeper than any performance review ever could. Around the same time, Lily was born, and my world shifted in a way I hadn't expected. The first time I held her, everything else, The old wounds, the career anxieties, the emptiness just faded away. Looking into her tiny, curious face, I promised myself she would always know she was loved and supported. I wanted to be the parent I'd needed. Someone who showed up, who listened, who believed in her. Being a mom brought a kind of happiness and purpose that nothing else ever had. But while my world was expanding, things for Sandra and Ian began to unravel. Ian's big dreams had come crashing down, his business folded under debts and bad luck. Sandra, who had always cared so much about appearances and what the neighbors thought, started to seem uncertain, her confidence chipped away by whispers and rumors. They were struggling financially, and Ian, once so proud and self-sufficient, had moved back in with Sandra. It was strange to think of them, once so sure of themselves, now just trying to keep their heads above water. I'll never forget the day I saw them again. It was in the grocery store, and years had passed since we'd last spoken. I was in the fancy cheese aisle, picking out something special for a dinner Mark and I were hosting, Lily babbling in the shopping cart. I turned a corner and nearly collided with them. Ian was pushing a cart with just a few basics: canned goods, a bag of rice. Sandra trailed behind, looking tired and older than I remembered. The sight of them, worn down, uncertain, caught me off guard. "Amanda," Sandra said, her voice fragile and unfamiliar. Ian glanced up, his expression tightening the moment he recognized me. I stood there with a cart full of organic groceries, Lily giggling, while they looked like they were scraping by. Sandra tried to muster a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're looking well," she said, glancing at my cart. Ian just grunted, his pride a wall between us. "Yeah, things have been good," I replied, trying to sound casual, though I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The last time we'd run into each other in a store, the roles had been reversed. I was the one struggling, and Ian had been quick to boast about his success. Now the tables had turned. I didn't gloat, but I couldn't hide the small sense of justice I felt. After that, something shifted. Suddenly, Sandra and Ian wanted to be part of my life again. It started with small gestures. Sandra would call just to check in, leaving awkward voicemails or sending stilted messages on social media. "Hi, Amanda, just wanted to see how you're doing. It's been so long." She never mentioned the grocery store, but I knew that was the catalyst. Ian was less subtle. Soon after, he texted, "Hey sis, we should catch up sometime. Got some ideas I'd love to run by you." The sudden interest felt suspicious, a sharp contrast to years of distance. At first, I ignored them. I didn't trust their intentions, and to be honest, I was still too hurt to even consider letting them back in. But they didn't give up. Sandra started calling Mark, painting herself as the caring stepmom, asking about Lily and how we were doing. Mark, ever the optimist, said, "Maybe they're trying to make amends." I wasn't convinced. To me, it seemed less like genuine concern, and more like they'd seen how well I was doing and wanted to share in it, or at least benefit from it. I felt myself torn. Part of me wanted to confront them, to ask outright why they'd ignored me for so long only to reappear now. Another part of me was just curious. How far would they go to get back into my life? Did they actually want a relationship? Or was it just about what I could offer them now? One quiet Saturday afternoon, I pulled into my driveway and saw them both standing in front of my house, as if they'd been waiting for me. For a moment I froze, uncertain whether to invite them in or turn them away. The past and present collided in that instant. The hopeful child I'd once been, and the woman I'd become, standing on my own ground at last. They looked so out of place on my front walk, like extras who'd stumbled into the climax of someone else's movie and realized too late they didn't know their lines. Sandra's knuckles were white around her purse strap. Her shoulders hunched up so tightly it seemed she was bracing for a blow, while Ian kept shifting from foot to foot, jamming his hands deeper into his pockets every time our eyes almost met. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows behind them, making them seem even more like strangers, outlines with nowhere else to go. Mark and Lily were still at the zoo with his parents, laughing at monkeys and eating cotton candy, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on our porch. I'd stayed home, using work as an excuse, but the truth was more complicated. A tangled knot of old wounds and unfinished business I never wanted to unravel. As I stepped out of the car, I caught my own reflection in the side window. Jaw clenched, shoulders squared, a woman preparing for battle rather than a family reunion. I felt the weight of the day pressing on my chest, an ache that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or upcoming meetings. Sandra's face lit up the second she saw me, but the smile didn't fool me. It was the same brittle expression she'd worn for every dentist appointment, every teacher conference, every moment she wanted something and was afraid she wouldn't get it. "Amanda, what a coincidence," she sang out, as if she hadn't been standing there, rehearsing her opening lines, waiting for me to come home. Ian gave a stiff, half-hearted nod, eyes darting to the mailbox, the flower bed, the cracks in the driveway, anywhere but my face. "What are you doing here?" I asked, hearing the flatness in my own voice and not bothering to hide it. No sense pretending. We'd all grown too old for make-believe. Sandra waved her hand, dismissing my question with a breezy flick, but her fingers trembled. "Oh, we just thought we'd drop by, catch up. It's been ages since we really talked, don't you think? Life gets away from us." I let the silence stretch, arms folded tight across my chest, the distance between us growing with every passing second. Her smile sharpened, desperate to fill the space. "Amanda, honey, we've been talking lately about your dad, about how proud he'd be of you. Look at this place. You've done so well for yourself, built a beautiful life, beautiful home. It's incredible what you've accomplished." Her words slid over me, oily and insincere. Compliments from Sandra always came with a catch, a string attached, a debt yet to be named. I waited, watching her struggle to keep up the charade. Ian cleared his throat, voice cracking under the strain. "Yeah, what Sandra means is, things have been tough for us. We've hit a rough patch, you know? Bad luck, mostly." "Rough patch?" I repeated, suspicion lacing every syllable. "What kind of rough patch?" Sandra shot Ian a warning glance, as if she could hold the dam together by sheer force of will. "It's not as bad as it sounds, just a little financial hiccup. Ian's business, well, the market turned on us and my health's been up and down. The bills keep coming, and it's been hard to stay afloat." She pressed her lips together, trying to look dignified, but I saw the fear flashing behind her eyes. I could have let them keep spinning their story, but I'd heard enough. "And?" I said, making it clear I wasn't interested in a pity party. Ian looked at the ground, scuffing his shoe against the concrete. "We thought maybe you could help us out. Just a little something, to help us get back on our feet. Alone, maybe. Nothing huge." His voice was almost pleading, a tone I'd never heard from the man who used to tower over me with disappointment. "Help you out?" I echoed, my heart thudding with a familiar mix of anger and disbelief. "You're here to ask me for money?" Sandra's mask faltered, cracks appearing as she let out a dramatic sigh. "Amanda, you make it sound so cold. We're family. It's not charity, just a loan. You're doing well, so well. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't really necessary." "Necessary?" The word stung. Memories flashed. Unpaid bills, empty cupboards, tearful nights when I'd wondered if there'd be food for dinner. Like it was necessary to drain my college fund? Or call me a disappointment when I scraped by on scholarships and part-time jobs? Is this another one of those necessities? Ian's jaw tightened, his composure slipping. "That's not fair, Amanda. We did what we thought was right. We kept a roof over your head. We made sacrifices." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Sacrifices? You mean for yourselves. Not for me. Not once." Sandra pressed a manicured hand to her chest as if my words were a physical blow. "Amanda, that's ancient history. People change. We're here now, trying to make amends. We're reaching out. Doesn't family mean anything to you?" I shook my head, feeling the old resentment rising up, bitter and uncontrollable. "Family? You mean the people who left me to pick up my own pieces? The ones who watched me struggle and never offered a hand? Who called me ungrateful when I asked for help? Don't talk to me about family." Ian's face flushed, anger breaking through his attempt at calm. "You're not being reasonable. You have everything now. A nice house, a good job, a family of your own. We're just asking for a little help. You owe us that much after everything." My voice was ice. "Owe you? I owe you nothing. Everything I have, I built myself, with no help from either of you. And now you show up, expecting me to bail you out like you're entitled to the life I made?" Sandra's patience snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "I can't believe this. After everything we've done for you, you'd slam the door in our faces? You wouldn't have made it without us." I stared at her, stunned by the nerve, the gall. What did you ever do for me except make things harder? Every step of the way you doubted me, undermined me, told me I'd never make it. Not once did you believe in me, not when it mattered. Ian's temper finally broke. You're a selfish, ungrateful brat. We gave you everything we could. A roof, food, a place to sleep. And now you act like you're too good for us? Like you don't owe us a thing? The words hit me, but they didn't hurt. Not anymore. I felt strangely calm, a cold clarity settling in my bones. Get off my property, I said, voice even and final. We're done here. Sandra's eyes glittered with anger as she leaned in close, her voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, Amanda. One day you'll find yourself alone, needing someone, and we won't be there. I took a step back, putting the door between us. Good. I've managed just fine without you this long. Sandra gave a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Fine, stay up there on your high horse. But don't forget where you came from. You're nothing without that degree. We're the ones who kept a roof over your head when you were nobody. Ian jumped in, his words harsh and final. You think you're better than us now, just because you made it out. Just because you have a nice house and a family? But life has a funny way of humbling people like you, Amanda. Don't get too comfortable. I looked at them one last time, taking in the lines of bitterness etched into their faces, the way their bodies seemed smaller somehow, weighed down by disappointment and resentment. You're right. Life knocks people down. You should know. You're living proof. With that, I turned, walked inside, and closed the door behind me, shutting out the past for good. The sound of the lock sliding into place was the sweetest relief I'd felt in years. Even from inside, I could hear Sandra grumbling as they left, ungrateful after everything we've done for her. She'll come crawling back one day, she muttered, her voice tinged with the bitterness I'd grown so used to. I listened to their footsteps recede down the driveway, the familiar cadence of disappointment and blame echoing behind them. But as their voices faded into the evening air, all I felt was relief, a release so profound it was almost physical. It was like stepping out of a thick, suffocating fog into bright, clear sunlight. For the first time in years, I understood what it truly meant to close a door. Not just the physical act, the click of the lock, the silence that settled afterward, but the emotional finality. I shut that door on them, on the endless cycle of hurt and expectation, and this time, I knew it was staying shut. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was protecting my peace. A year later, Mark and I took Lily to an amusement park. The day was perfect, the kind of day that felt like a promise kept. Blue skies stretched overhead, laughter floated on the breeze, and the smell of buttery popcorn lingered everywhere we went. Lily was practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes wide as she pointed at every ride, tugging at our hands, begging us to let her try the biggest roller coasters. Her joy was infectious, and Mark and I exchanged smiles, grateful for these simple moments of happiness we'd built together from the ground up. We were heading toward the food stalls, debating between funnel cakes and hot dogs, when I spotted him. Ian. He emerged from a public restroom in a faded park uniform, a mop and bucket in hand. The years had not been kind. His shoulders slumped, his face was drawn and tired, and he looked utterly spent, as if the weight of everything he'd carried had finally caught up to him. He hadn't noticed us yet. His gaze was fixed on the ground, lost in his own thoughts. For a fleeting moment, I was invisible to him, just another face in the crowd. But then, as we drew closer, his eyes flicked up and met mine. I saw everything in that instant, a flash of recognition followed by raw shock, then a wave of shame that seemed to wash over him, draining what little color was left in his cheeks. He froze, mop handle clutched tightly in his fist, as if it could anchor him to some last scrap of dignity. Before I could even process what I was seeing, he spun around, his movements stiff and hurried, dragging the mop bucket behind him. He disappeared into the throng of park-goers, swallowed up by the crowd, leaving only a faint trail of soapy water and regret in his wake. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching the place where he'd vanished. Mark noticed I'd stopped and turned back, concern flickering across his face. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I forced a smile, not wanting to disrupt Lily's excitement. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's go find that cotton candy stand." Lily squealed in agreement, tugging us forward, but my mind was still with Ian. Seeing him like that, so diminished, so desperate to avoid me, stirred up a storm of old memories. The insults that had chipped away at my confidence, the eye rolls and dismissive sighs that made me question my worth, years of being made to feel like an afterthought, a burden, and Sandra, always standing behind him, amplifying the pain with her own brand of cutting remarks, twisting the knife a little deeper each time. I'd spent so long carrying the burden of their words, letting them define the edges of who I thought I was. But something had shifted. Standing in the middle of that bustling amusement park, surrounded by laughter and the bright colors of childhood, it hit me just how far I'd come. Ian and Sandra's voices no longer held power over me. Their approval, once my desperate pursuit, now seemed irrelevant. I realized how much time I'd wasted trying to fit into a version of family that would never exist, mourning the acceptance I'd never receive. But now, my life was full in ways I never could have imagined back then. I looked over at Mark, steady, kind, always there for me, and at Lily, chattering nonstop about her favorite rides. In them, I saw the family I had chosen and built, one filled with love, respect, and genuine care. Everything I'd achieved, every step I'd taken, I'd done without the support I once thought I couldn't live without. My career, my home, my happiness, they were mine and they were real. The pride I felt wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, and unshakable. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for Ian and Sandra. I thought about how their lives had unraveled, how the walls they'd built to keep others out had become their own prison. I wondered if they ever regretted the choices they'd made, the words spoken in anger, the opportunities squandered, the relationships left in ruins. Maybe they did, or maybe they'd just grown used to the bitterness, letting it fill the spaces where love should have been. But I didn't linger on those thoughts for long. They had made their choices, and now they lived with the consequences. I had spent enough years grieving for the family I wished I'd had, enough nights replaying old arguments and wishing things could be different. Now I was done looking back. My focus was on the family I'd created, the one that brought me joy, laughter, and peace. As we made our way to the car, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Lily skipped ahead, still buzzing about her day, and Mark slipped his arm around my shoulders. I smiled down at my daughter, overwhelmed with gratitude for the messy, beautiful, imperfect life I had now. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The door behind me was closed for good, and in front of me, the world was wide open.